Hatred towards the government of the United States intensified. He was convinced that American political and economic self-interest had brought the world to the brink of destruction. The Joneses returned to Indianapolis in December of 1963. Jim immediately made plans to move his congregation, who had been waiting patiently for their leader's return.
By 1964, he discovered the ideal spot, Redwood Valley, California, 100 miles north of San Francisco. In the summer of 1965, Jones gathered his small flock of 140 loyal souls, and together they migrated across the country.
To another of the 9 safe places on the list, Northern California. In the summer of 1964, the family, along with about 140 congregants, moved to the town of Ukiah in the Redwood Valley area above San Francisco.
Redwood Valley was a friendly place with good climate, plentiful jobs, and beneficial welfare.
Over the next few months, church services were held in rented church buildings and then at a ranch at Ridgewood. Throughout the week, Jim worked as a high school teacher. After 3 years of steadily building up its membership, the People's Temple was granted official standing by the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, Northern California, Nevada region in 1968. The following February, the People's Temple Redwood Valley complex opened. The complex included the Joneses' home, a swimming pool, childcare center, old folks' homes, the temple meeting place, and a ranch. All of this, of course, was completely integrated. This little Garden of Eden sat in the middle of a strictly segregated Redwood Valley.
He established a commune with housing for his followers, and he opened nursing homes for the aged. His integrated church attracted many middle-class whites who believed in his gospel of socialism.
People's Temple offered people hope to change their lives in a radical way, in a way that society was not changing.
You haven't been in love for a month. Been too busy.
We have about every level of society, all socioeconomic income strata, from professional down to the ordinary field worker, field laborer.
I was deeply moved by his persuasive manner and his charisma.
There was a person, in the person of Jim, who showed such concern, such tenderness and love for children and for animals. I was overwhelmed.
To assist him in the running of the People's Temple, Jones created the Planning Commission, made up of his most devoted followers. Many were women who were crucial to running his movement.
Women in particular rose through the ranks in People's Temple to positions of great responsibility. There was no glass ceiling in People's Temple. So very young women in their 20s and 30s, were in control of millions of dollars of assets. They were in control of making a variety of decisions, which in corporate America they would not have ever.
Within a year, the People's Temple had expanded into San Francisco. Buses were put on to transport new parishioners there to Redwood Valley for weekend services. Jim also took to the road by bus, touring from one city to the next, winning new converts in each place, many of which were so captivated by the charismatic preacher that they moved to the Redwood Valley Ranch.
Power the person was interested in, whether it was sexuality, whatever it was that was the person's weakness, he would attempt to place that person in a gratification point that they knew they couldn't duplicate in the outside world.
By 1969, either out of his own desire or as a means of control, Jones embraced free love and free sex in his church. It was an unwritten rule. He could demand sex from any woman or man in the congregation whenever he wanted it.
He used personal charisma and sexual authority over both women and men, but particularly women. I think that he felt he could tie them to him both kind of organizationally and also romantically.
He would say, I want every person in this room who has had sex with me to stand up. and maybe a couple of people would be really shy, and they'd sit down. He says, now I want everybody, and he'd point to the person, I want you to stand up and admit to this. And so everybody in the room who had had sex with him would have to stand up.
It was all about building Jim's power. He even went one step further. While still married to Marcelin, he took a mistress, the first of many. She was a married woman named Carolyn Moore Layton.
There was a real negative feeling that this isn't right. Here's a pastor, and my understanding of pastors was that they did not have that kind of relationship with parishioners.
But Jones was hardly the average pastor. When still a college freshman, he had questioned the existence of God. Now, with a dedicated following, he was openly denying the existence of a supreme being. More ominously, he even began to call himself God. With that idea firmly in mind, Jones now worked harder than ever to build his movement by recruiting heavily in Los Angeles and San Francisco. Perhaps because what he and People's Temple offered was so unusual, he met with success.
There's no question that a part of the way in which the People's Temple was able to retain people is that it was the best drama in town. It provided not only some social worth, or if that happened to be your interest, or if your interest happened to be drama, it provided drama.
Jones was now obsessed with building his movement. Believing he needed more energy to support his frenetic pace, Jones started injecting amphetamines, speed. The drug did give him more stamina, and he did not seem to care about its addictive consequences or its tendency to build paranoia. Soon, Jim Jones would be on the move once again, this time to the fertile, greener pastures of San Francisco. With the move of People's Temple headquarters to San Francisco in 1972, Jim Jones and his church were on the verge of something new. Jones was an opportunist. He saw a way to build his influence by going public and entering local politics. So he ordered members of People's Temple to work in election campaigns and demonstrate for social causes. Jones' payoff came in 1976, when San Francisco Mayor George Moscone named him chairman of the Housing Authority.
Jim really enjoyed the adulation and the popularity and the fame that moving to San Francisco brought him, because there he could rub shoulders with San Francisco politicians, with people from all over the country, from national political leaders. So he really enjoyed kind of playing with the big boys.
In public, Jones cultivated the look of a social activist. In private, inside the confines of People's Temple, he was a tyrant. He controlled his congregation with what he called public humiliation and catharsis sessions. These had started in Redwood Valley, and they would continue through the life of the movement.
The church justified those actions by saying that they were dealing with hardcore social misfits, and that rather than turn people over to the police to be put in prison or jail, they chose to deal with those problems in their own way within their organization.
Yet his congregation remained devoted to him. The elderly were his most loyal parishioners. They signed their Social Security and pension checks over to People's Temple. Some even gave their homes and savings to the church because it offered a promise of a better life. As the coffers of the People's Temple grew, so did Jones' hold over his followers. But his entry into the world only seemed to intensify his paranoia.
We quickly discovered the secrecy and the paranoia, which was a part of Jim and a part of People's Temple. People's Temple had its secrets, and they were very suspicious of anybody who tried to find out about those secrets, and they always felt that there was a conspiracy.
In spite of their public work, People's Temple was still somewhat isolated. Outsiders had no idea what went on behind closed doors. That would soon change because everywhere Jones went, hundreds of his followers trailed behind him. Curious reporters couldn't help but notice.
He'd bring all of these people in, and he himself would come in the midst of a smaller a retinue of aides. They'd shoo him to the front of the room, put him on the center of the chair, and basically sort of guard him the whole time. Guys in dark glasses, black suits, the whole thing. It was very unusual.
Kilduff was suspicious of Jim Jones and what he called his big public blitz, so he started investigating People's Temple.
The church didn't want any of this. The folks said, oh, Jim Jones likes to work sort of low-key. The Reverend doesn't want to at this time appear to sort of crowd the center stage and take credit from anyone else. And there was all this aw shucks kind of shy attitude about the whole thing. And it didn't ring right.
But Kilduff's editors at the San Francisco Chronicle killed the story, claiming it was old news. Kilduff now pursued the story for New West magazine. Soon, there were pressures on him to...
People's Temple experienced rapid expansion during the 1970s. However, it was also during this time that the church received its first negative media coverage. A series of articles in the San Francisco Examiner profiled the church, painting Jones as a false messiah who had claimed to bring 43 people back from the dead. The authority structure of the church was also put under the spotlight. The Examiner articles drew the interest of other media outlets. From then on, Jones came to view the media as the enemy and an agent of the devil himself. Things
stopped.
I kept getting all these calls late at night at home and at funny times at the office saying, you know, you really shouldn't be writing too much about this guy. He's doing the Lord's work. And I just began to feel that this thing really wasn't being dealt with or spoken to me straight.
In his investigation, Kilduff discovered a problem for People's Temple that Jim Jones could not control. Defectors, men and women who had left the movement and were talking about what took place inside the church.
We had guards constantly around the church. We were constantly watched when we'd go to school or whatever. Hey, we were afraid to talk to our own parents because when we did, we were turned in for being negative.
Things got bad gradually. First, they started whippings with a belt, a few whacks, and for minor infractions such as drinking and smoking or being late for work. Then they went to the board, and my daughter received 75 whacks with this board. When she went to school and dressed down for gym, the girl said her butt looked like hamburger.
Anyone contemplating leaving the church was deathly afraid of the consequences.
In making a decision to leave People's Temple, you have to decide you'd rather die than go back, because they've threatened to kill all traitors. When we left, we had all kinds of threatening phone calls, threatening letters.
Defections fueled Jones' paranoia. He said the police and government were interfering in their lives, and he would go to extremes to protect his flock.
He would say that, okay, now, if the people, the government officials or whatever, were to come in here and try to destroy us or take us or try to expose me or us, then we would kill ourselves so no one would live to tell the story of the things that happened.
It got worse when, in 1973, 8 prominent members of the People's Temple defected. Stories emerged of financial abuse, mind control, and tax evasion. In response to the pressure brought upon the church by the media and the defectors, Jim first proposed the idea of mass suicide. Such a grand action would establish the congregants as martyrs and shame those who were out to get them. As for how, however, Jones's words were nothing more than bluster. It was during the summer of 1973 that Jones made the decision to relocate the People's Temple to the South American country of Guyana. 2 months later, he visited the country in order to open negotiations to purchase 27,000 acres of land in the Matthew Ridge area near the Venezuelan border. The Guyanese Cooperative Republic was a socialist country, and for Jones, who had passed through on his return trip from Brazil in 1963, it was an ideal haven. The first People's Temple members arrived in Guyana in March of 1974 to begin the mammoth task of clearing the jungle and breaking ground for construction on what was to become Jonestown. By now, there was renewed pressure on the church from the American media. On August 1st, 1977, an article appeared in New West magazine that alleged that members had been beaten, the church was rife with financial misdealings, and that Jim Jones was nothing more than a charlatan. By the time the article hit the newsstands, Jones was already in Guyana.
Jones even started testing the will of his parishioners by convincing them they had committed mass suicide.
I'd gone through a false mass suicide. I went through one talk and I went through one where we actually took a drink and we were told we had an hour to live so that Jones could find out how people would react psychologically.
Now, with his fear of curious outsiders and his general paranoia ratcheting ever higher, Jones looked for an escape to someplace far from prying eyes. He found it in a tiny backwards country at the northern end of South America, Guyana.
On Memorial Day 1977, along with 600 congregation members, Jones made an appearance at a commemoration for suicides who had jumped off San Francisco's Golden Gate Bridge. In his address on this day, he declared, "I have been in a suicidal mood myself today, so I have personal empathy for what we are doing here today."
He sent an advance team to clear and develop a site for People's Temple's new home. It would be called simply Jonestown. In 1974, in the dense jungle 140 miles from Georgetown, the capital of Guyana, Jim Jones' small advance guard cleared the land, planted crops, and built homes, paving the way for the mass migration to come.
They thought that they were pioneers and they were going to do something that would make a difference. They were going to create a better world, a better life for their families and themselves. And so there was a lot of sense of high adventure.
From Jonestown, the advance guard sent encouraging messages back to the People's Temple about Jim Jones, the man they called Father.
Hello, family. It's such a joy and great pleasure being here because of Father's love. We are trying to make, and we are making, a place of refuge for all of you here.
Back in San Francisco, the majority of his followers were increasingly subjected to Jim Jones' growing paranoia.
When you first came to People's Temple, you had no idea what was really happening with Jim Jones. He kept all his little insanities undercover.
I really don't feel comfortable with our worship being photographed. I really don't. I don't feel
As secretive as Jones was, his every move now came under the critical eye of the press. More ex-members had come forward to describe the secrets of Jones's church. In August 1977, a magazine article appeared exposing People's Temple. Feeling under siege, a beleaguered Jim Jones started sending his parishioners in small groups to Guyana. For some, it was simply freedom from worry and want. For others, it was a genuine socialist experiment.
Most of the people who were part of People's Temple who went to Guyana had no independent financial resources. Their finances and their futures were tied up in People's Temple, and so in one sense they had to go. In another sense, however, they wanted to go. They saw Jonestown as the promised land.
Early on in Jonestown, the pioneers appeared to be happy. They were certainly dedicated to Jones and their new life.
Jonestown has turned into an absolute village. Really, you have a heaven across the sea waiting for you.
By September, there were more than 1,000 People's Temple members in Guyana, with only about 50 or so left in the United States. The sudden influx of people placed severe strain on the facilities at Jonestown. However, members enthusiastically pitched in to extend the village in order to accommodate the demand. 3/4 of the transplanted residents were black, with the remainder being white, Hispanic, Asian, and Native American.